At 7 in the morning, the Silver-Wing private aviation hangar shimmered under cold November light. Marcus Reed's 15-year-old Ford pickup rattled into the employee lot, exhaust pipe coughing white steam into the Denver air.
We had a
He parked in the
deal,
far
a
corner
deal.
beneath the broken streetlight, same spot he'd claimed for 3 years running. The engine ticked as it cooled. Beside him, Liam pressed his nose against the passenger window, breath fogging the glass as he traced the outline of a Gulfstream G650 sitting pretty on the tarmac beyond the chain-link fence. 8 years old, and the kid could identify tail numbers from 100 yards out. Marcus watched his son's fingers follow the curve of the winglet, sketching invisible lines only a child who dreamed in aviation could see. Same sharp jawline Marcus saw in the mirror every morning. Same gray-blue eyes that cataloged everything, forgot nothing. At 8, Liam already understood more about aircraft systems than most grown men who'd never bothered looking past a commercial window seat. The boy also understood, without anyone spelling it out, that his father's hands that once commanded multi-million-dollar experimental jets through the edge of physics, now pushed a janitorial cart and scrubbed hydraulic stains from concrete floors. Marcus killed the ignition. The silence settled heavy between them, broken only by the distant whine of a turbine test somewhere inside the hangar. Liam's small voice cut through. "Dad, can I draw that one today?" Marcus ruffled the kid's hair, felt the familiar ache in his chest. "Draw whatever you want, buddy. But remember, we're quiet in the hangar. The engineers get cranky when kids make noise." His eyes tracked to the G650ER on the apron, tail number N-Asford gleaming in fresh paint. Something about the way it sat bothered him. Port side listing maybe half a degree low. Could be nothing. Could be a hydraulic pressure bleed overnight. Old instincts never died, just got buried under 3 years of pushing a mop and being invisible. He made a mental note to check the pressure logs before his shift ended. Not that anyone would read his maintenance reports. They never did. They walked through the service entrance together, Liam's hand small and trusting in his. The hangar smelled like it always did, jet fuel, burnt coffee, and the metallic bite of expensive machinery being put through its paces. Marcus clocked in at exactly 7, grabbed his maintenance cart from the equipment cage, and began the daily routine he could perform in his sleep. Sweep the hangar bays, empty the trash cans in the pilot's lounge, clean the executive waiting area where people in $1,000 suits sipped espresso and pretended the help didn't exist, polish the stainless steel railings until they gleamed, invisible, reliable, beneath notice. Exactly how he'd designed his life after everything fell apart. Marcus moved through the space with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood systems. While he swept beneath the wing of a Bombardier Challenger, his eyes caught the faint shimmer of hydraulic fluid weeping from a service panel. He noted it in his mental checklist, then pulled out his phone and logged it in the maintenance app. Panel 3B, starboard wing, minor seepage, recommend inspection. No one would read it. They never did. But he logged it anyway, because that's what you did when you actually gave a damn about keeping people alive. The engineers, young guys in their 30s, MIT and Caltech diplomas framed in their minds like shields, clustered near the diagnostic computers. They argued about sensor calibrations and firmware updates, voices carrying across the hangar with the confidence of men who'd never been wrong enough to learn humility. Polo shirts pressed crisp, coffee thermoses that cost more than Marcus made in a day. They spoke in acronyms and jargon, a language designed to exclude anyone who didn't have the right credentials hanging on their wall. Marcus knew 3 of them by name. Simon Graves, the chief engineer, silver-haired and wire-rimmed, permanent frown etched deep from carrying the weight of being responsible for things he only understood through computer screens. Derek Patel, avionics specialist, wore noise-canceling headphones even in meetings, the kind of guy who trusted machines more than people. Jennifer Carr, youngest of the bunch, telemetry expert who actually smiled at Marcus sometimes when they passed in the hallway. Small mercy in a place where most people looked through him like he was part of the equipment. None of them knew Marcus had designed hydraulic failsafe systems for the F/A-18 Super Hornet. None of them knew he'd logged over 3,000 flight hours in experimental aircraft that could kill you if you sneezed wrong. None of them knew the janitor sweeping their floors held an ATP license that qualified him to fly anything with wings. And Marcus preferred it that way, preferred the anonymity, preferred the predictable schedule that let him pick Liam up from school every afternoon at 3:30, preferred the simple math of exchanging prestige and adrenaline for something more valuable, being present in his son's life. The memory hit him before he could stop it. Cockpit filling with smoke, alarms screaming a symphony of failure, Lieutenant Danny Kowalski's voice crackling through the intercom, panic bleeding through the professional calm they'd trained into their bones. "Marcus, I can't see! I can't!" The ejection sequence failed. Primary and backup, both dead on a system that had been tested 1,000 times and failed exactly once, at exactly the wrong moment. Marcus punched out at 2,000 feet. Danny didn't. The Board of Inquiry cleared him. Mechanical failure, they said. Manufacturing defect in the seat's rocket motor initiator. Not pilot error. Not Marcus's fault that he'd pushed the prototype past recommended parameters, ignored Danny's warnings about going too fast, too steep, chasing the edge of what the aircraft could do instead of what it should do. Not his fault in the legal sense, but the image of Rachel Kowalski holding their newborn daughter at the funeral, the way she looked at Marcus, not with accusation, worse, with pity. That was a verdict no board could overturn. Marcus shook his head, forced the memory back into its locked box. He focused on the present. The smooth motion of the broom, the satisfying sound of debris hitting the dustpan, the weight of Liam's backpack on his shoulder as the boy settled into his usual corner with his sketchbook. Liam had claimed a spot behind Marcus's maintenance cart 3 years ago, first day on the job. The kid would sit cross-legged with his drawing supplies, sketching aircraft with a detail that made engineers do double takes when they happened to glance over. Today he was working on the G650ER, rendering it in careful pencil strokes, labeling parts in block letters a second grader had no business knowing. Fuselage, empennage, turbofan engines, winglets. Marcus paused his mopping, knelt beside his son. "What's this part called?" Liam pointed to the wheel assembly. "Main landing gear. See how it retracts into the belly? There's a hydraulic actuator that controls the extension and retraction sequence." Marcus felt the familiar swell of pride mixed with guilt. "Exactly right, buddy. Hydraulics are just muscle systems for machines." The kid absorbed it, filed it away with everything else Marcus taught him in the margins of a life that should have been bigger, brighter. "Do you miss flying them?" The question landed like a punch. Marcus kept his voice steady, met those two wise eyes. "Every day. But I wouldn't trade this," he tapped the sketchbook, "for anything in the world. You're my priority now." Liam nodded, but Marcus saw the flicker of doubt, the weight of understanding that came too early. The boy was smart enough to grasp sacrifice, old enough to feel guilty about it. A commotion at the hangar entrance cut through their moment, voices raised in professional panic, the screech of expensive tires on polished concrete. Marcus stood, instinct positioning himself between Liam and whatever chaos was about to unfold. A black Mercedes S-Class sedan rocketed through the open bay door, brakes chirping as it stopped inches from the safety line. The passenger door flew open, and Charlotte Ashford stepped out. Phone pressed to her ear. Tailored charcoal Armani suit worth more than Marcus's monthly salary. Her heels clicked across the concrete like gunshots, each step radiating the kind of impatience that came from never hearing the word no. Everyone at Silverwing knew her. Charlotte Ashford, CEO of Ashford Aerospace Capital, owner of the G650ER, currently sitting on the tarmac, the woman whose signature appeared on every paycheck Marcus received, filtered through 3 layers of management to maintain the necessary distance between money and the people who made money possible. She was younger than he'd expected, late 30s maybe, dark hair pulled into a severe bun, every line of her body language broadcasting control and consequence. The phone conversation was loud enough to echo. "I don't care about the weather window in New York. Move the meeting to 8 a.m. tomorrow. I'll be there by 7:30. Yes, I'm flying tonight. No, I don't need a backup plan. I pay you people to make sure there is no backup plan." She ended the call with a jab that looked personal, turned her attention to Simon Graves, who'd hurried over with his tablet clutched like a shield against incoming fire. "Ms. Ashford, we weren't expecting you until—" Charlotte's hand came up, cutting him off mid-sentence. "I'm 3 hours early because I need wheels up by 6 p.m. Is the aircraft ready?" Simon's face went the color of old newspaper. "Well, we've been running some diagnostic—" The interruption came sharp as a blade. "I didn't ask for a technical dissertation, Simon. Yes or no? Is my jet ready to fly?" Marcus watched from 30 feet away, mop forgotten in its bucket. He'd heard enough of the technical debate brewing to understand the problem. More importantly, he'd already diagnosed it an hour ago during his routine sweep beneath the aircraft's belly. That faint, high-pitched whistle when the APU cycled on wasn't normal turbine whine. It was metal singing under thermal stress, the kind of sound you only recognized after years of listening to machines scream their warnings from the cockpit of a failing aircraft. The hydraulic pressure fluctuations Simon's team was chasing weren't a sensor problem. They were a symptom. Somewhere in the primary flow regulator assembly, probably in the housing that connected the main pump to the distribution manifold, a bolt or seal was warping under heat stress. As the metal expanded and contracted with each power cycle, it created microscopic gaps in the pressure seal. The computer saw the fluctuations and threw warning codes. The engineers, trained to trust their diagnostics, assumed it was a software issue because that's what the screens told them. But Marcus knew better. He'd seen this exact failure mode on a Gulfstream G550 prototype in 2014, watched it progress from intermittent readings to catastrophic seal failure at rotation speed, the kind of failure that turned a $250 million aircraft into a fireball before the landing gear finished retracting. He pulled out his phone, opened the maintenance app, typed with the precision of someone who understood that words could save lives. Pressure fluctuation consistent with thermal warping in primary hydraulic regulator housing, likely due to loose torque on mounting bolts or degraded seal. Recommend immediate manual inspection of regulator assembly at Station 4C, port side wing root. Warning: if left unaddressed, warping will progress to catastrophic seal failure under sustained high-thrust conditions. Estimated failure point, V1 rotation speed, or shortly after takeoff. He hit submit, watched the report disappear into Simon's queue, where it would sit unread among hundreds of other automated notifications. Marcus had learned long ago that observations from a man in a janitor's uniform were invisible, no matter how accurate, no matter how urgent. Inside the hangar, the atmosphere turned volatile. 4 senior engineers crowded around the cockpit access hatch, shouting conflicting instructions to the ground crew. They'd split into warring factions, the sensorists arguing for a fault in the data acquisition unit, the firmwareists insisting on a bug in the primary flight control computer. "We need to cycle the power bus," Michael, the lead avionics specialist, his voice strained with the kind of impatience that came from being confident and wrong. "It's a conflict between the redundant systems." "You're wrong," Sarah, the telemetry expert, shot back. "The DAU is showing a clean output. It's the PFCC overcompensating for noise. A reboot will only mask the data, not fix the underlying frequency issue." Their debate was highly technical, impressively complicated, and completely irrelevant to the actual failure. The diagnostic software had confirmed only a temporary intermittent sensor fault, which they were trying to fix by cycling the system. Futile effort, rearranging deck chairs on a ship already taking water. The jet's engine coughed during a test start, a deep rattling sound that made the scaffolding vibrate. The technical team froze, staring at screens instead of listening to what the machine was trying to tell them. Charlotte arrived on scene, her voice cutting through the chaos like a chainsaw through balsa wood. "This is costing millions of dollars. I need a solution, not an aerospace debate club. We've lost contact with the backup pilots. This flight must leave tonight." She glared at the engineers, who shrank under her gaze, their technical arguments collapsing under the weight of financial pressure. Then her eyes swept across the hangar, cataloging assets and obstacles with the cold efficiency of someone who saw people as line items on a balance sheet. Her gaze landed on Marcus. For one frozen moment, their eyes locked. He watched the calculation happen in real time. She registered his faded overalls, his work boots, his calloused hands gripping a mop handle. She dismissed him as irrelevant before her eyes had even finished moving past him. The kind of instant categorization that came from a lifetime of sorting people into useful and invisible. Then she smiled. It wasn't kind. "Well," Charlotte said, her voice dripping with theatrical sarcasm, loud enough to carry across the cavernous space, "since my highly paid engineering team seems to be stumped, perhaps we should ask for a second opinion." She gestured toward Marcus with an exaggerated flourish that turned him into a prop in her performance. "Excuse me, sir. Yes, you, with the mop. Do you have any thoughts on complex aerospace hydraulic systems? Or are you too busy ensuring our floors are spotless to solve a multi-million-dollar problem?" The hangar went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Marcus felt the weight of 30 pairs of eyes land on him like spotlights. The engineers looked uncomfortable. Jennifer actually winced, but nobody spoke up. Simon's face settled into careful neutrality, the expression of a man who'd learned to let executive tantrums run their course without getting burned. Liam's small hand gripped the edge of the maintenance cart so hard his knuckles went white. Marcus could walk away. Should walk away. He'd perfected the art of invisibility over 3 years, learned to let insults slide off like rain on waxed composite. But something in Charlotte's smile, the casual cruelty of it, the certainty that she could humiliate him without consequence, made his jaw tighten. And then he saw Liam's face. The boy wasn't crying, but his eyes were wet. His chest rose and fell with rapid, shallow breaths. He was 8 years old, watching his father get mocked by a woman in a $10,000 suit. And he didn't understand why his dad, who knew everything about planes, who could fix anything, who was the smartest person Liam knew, just stood there and took it. Marcus made a decision. He set down the mop with deliberate care, met Charlotte's gaze with the calm he'd learned in 1,000 emergency situations where panic meant death. "Actually, ma'am, I submitted a maintenance report an hour ago identifying the likely cause of your hydraulic issue." Charlotte's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" Marcus kept his voice level, professional, giving her nothing to grab onto except competence. The pressure fluctuations your team is observing aren't a sensor fault. They're symptomatic of thermal warping in the primary flow regulator housing. The intermittent readings correlate with APU power cycles, which suggests the mounting hardware is experiencing stress-induced expansion. If you attempt to fly the aircraft in its current condition, the seal will fail catastrophically during high-thrust demand, most likely at or shortly after V1 rotation speed. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the hum of ventilation systems and someone's sharp intake of breath. Simon's fingers flew across his tablet, pulling up the maintenance queue, bypassing the filtered display that had been masking the problem. His face turned from pale to ash gray as he found Marcus's report, read the technical language that was too specific, too detailed to be anything but legitimate observation. "Jesus Christ," Simon whispered, voice cracking. "He's right. The report is here. Time-stamped at 07:14 this morning." Charlotte stared at Marcus like he'd suddenly grown a second head. "Who the hell are you?" "Marcus Reed, ma'am. Maintenance supervisor." He kept his tone neutral, refusing to perform either superiority or subservience. "I logged the observation in the standard reporting system. The thermal signature is consistent with loose torque specs on the regulator mounting bolts. It's a mechanical issue, not a software problem. Should take about 45 minutes to access, inspect, and correct." Derek pulled up the report on his own tablet, eyes scanning the dense technical prose. "This is incredibly specific. How did you—" Marcus cut him off with simple truth. "Because I've seen this exact failure mode before. On a Gulfstream G550 prototype in 2014. Same symptom set, same root cause. The computer can't diagnose it because the sensors are reporting accurately. The pressure is fluctuating. But the fluctuation is physical, not digital." Charlotte's expression shifted from shock to something harder to read. Embarrassment, maybe. Anger, definitely. She turned to Simon, voice tight. "Is he qualified to make this assessment?" Simon scrolled through Marcus's employee file, frown deepening with each line. When he looked up, his eyes had gone wide. "Ms. Ashford, according to this, Mr. Reed has an aerospace engineering degree from Embry-Riddle and—" He trailed off, reading ahead to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. "He's a former naval test pilot." The hangar erupted in whispers. Marcus heard fragments of shocked conversations, felt the shift in how people looked at him, the sudden recalibration of assumptions. Charlotte's face flushed red. "Then why is he pushing a mop?" The question came out sharp, accusatory, as if Marcus's current job was somehow fraud or deception instead of a choice made for reasons she couldn't begin to understand. Marcus met her eyes, kept his voice steady. "Because I have a son who needs me home by 3:30 every afternoon. And because I don't fly anymore." The weight of that statement settled over the crowd like a blanket. Charlotte opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. For the first time since she'd arrived, she seemed at a loss for words. Then her phone rang. She answered without breaking eye contact with Marcus. "What?" "No, the jet it's being repaired." "Yes, I'll be there. I don't care what you have to do. Hold the meeting until I arrive." She ended the call, jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its mocking edge, but kept the arrogance, the assumption that money and authority could fix anything. "Fine. Mr. Reed, you have 45 minutes to prove your theory. Simon, assign him whatever support he needs. If he's wrong, he's fired. If he's right—" She paused, a calculating look crossing her face. "We'll discuss compensation." She turned on her heel, designer shoes clicking toward the executive lounge without waiting for a response, without acknowledging the apology she owed, without seeming to register that she'd just publicly humiliated the one man capable of saving her $250 million deal. Marcus stood in the center of the hangar, surrounded by engineers who now looked at him with a mixture of respect and confusion, trying to reconcile the janitor they'd ignored for 3 years with the expert who'd just diagnosed a catastrophic failure they'd missed. Liam emerged from behind the maintenance cart, eyes shining with something Marcus hadn't seen in months: pride. The boy stood a little taller, shoulders back, chin up. But as Marcus walked toward the aircraft, his hands were shaking. Because the only way to confirm the diagnosis, to be absolutely certain the repair would hold under operational stress, was to do the one thing he'd sworn 6 years ago he'd never do again. He'd have to fly. Simon assigned Derek and Jennifer to assist, along with 2 mechanics from the ground crew. The team assembled around the G650's port wing route, where the primary hydraulic regulator assembly lived deep in the fuselage. Marcus knelt beside the access panel, his hands moving with practiced confidence toward the release latches, muscle memory from thousands of hours doing exactly this kind of work. "We'll need a thermal imaging camera to confirm the heat signature," Marcus said, already visualizing the repair sequence. "A torque wrench calibrated to spec, and replacement seals if the current ones show degradation." Derek jogged toward the tool crib without being asked twice. Jennifer crouched beside Marcus, watching as he removed the panel with efficient, economical movements that spoke of deep familiarity. "How long were you a test pilot?" she asked quietly. 12 years. Flew everything from trainers to experimental stealth platforms. First solo in an F/A-18 when I was 25. "Why'd you stop?" Marcus's hands paused for a fraction of a second, the only tell. "Lost someone. Decided I'd pushed my luck far enough." Jennifer nodded slowly, respecting the boundary he'd drawn. "For what it's worth, that was the most specific diagnostic I've heard in 5 years of working here. Simon's good, but he thinks in software. You think in metal." "Different tool set," Marcus said, resuming work. "Both necessary." Derek returned with the equipment: thermal camera, calibrated torque wrench, replacement seals, and vacuum-sealed packaging. Marcus set to work, narrating his observations as he went, turning the repair into an impromptu master class for the engineers watching. He used the thermal camera to scan the regulator housing, the infrared display painting a clear picture of thermal stress. "There. See that hot spot at the upper mounting bracket? That's our culprit. The bolt has loosened by approximately a quarter turn, allowing the housing to shift under thermal expansion. Every time the APU cycles on, the housing heats up, the gap widens, and the pressure seal flexes. That's what's causing the fluctuations." Simon, watching over Derek's shoulder, let out a low whistle. "How the hell did you spot this from 30 feet away with a mop in your hand?" Marcus didn't look up from his work. "I heard it. There's a specific frequency resonance when metal vibrates under thermal stress. Once you've heard it enough times, you don't forget." As Marcus removed the regulator housing to access the mounting bolts, his flashlight beam caught something that made his blood run cold. A hairline crack in the adjacent fuel line bracket, barely visible without magnification. It was small, hadn't propagated yet, but it was there, running parallel to the main fuel line that fed the port engine. The crack was in early stages. Another 50 flight hours, maybe 100, and it would fail. Catastrophically. "Simon." Marcus's voice went tight. "Get over here." The chief engineer knelt beside him, followed Marcus's pointing finger, and went pale. Jesus Christ. Jennifer checked the logs on her tablet, voice shaking slightly. That wasn't there on the last inspection. We did a full structural review 3 weeks ago. Marcus kept his tone clinical, pushing down the adrenaline. It's stress-induced, probably from the same thermal cycling that loosened the regulator bolts. The bracket is mounted too close to the heat shield. Every time the engine runs hot, it flexes the bracket. Eventually, he didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood what eventually meant. Simon's face was grim. We can't fly with that crack. Marcus nodded. No, you can't. How long to replace the bracket? Derek ran calculations on his tablet, face falling as the numbers came back. 8 hours minimum. We'd have to source the part from Gulfstream, and they're closed for the night. Earliest delivery would be tomorrow afternoon. Marcus sat back on his heels, mind racing through options. There was another way. A temporary fix that would hold for 1 flight, maybe 2, if the conditions were perfect and the execution flawless. It involved reinforcing the bracket with a custom fabricated support strut, then limiting the engine thrust to 85% maximum to reduce thermal stress. But it was risky. Not dangerous if done correctly, but it required precise execution and constant monitoring during flight. The kind of monitoring that only a pilot in the cockpit could provide. A pilot with Marcus's specific experience in thermal stress failures and emergency systems management. A pilot who hadn't flown in 6 years, because the last time he'd pushed an aircraft past its limits, his best friend died screaming. Marcus looked at the aircraft, then back at the crack in the fuel line bracket. He thought about Charlotte Ashford's merger meeting in New York, her $250 million deal. He thought about the jobs that depended on Ashford Aerospace Capital staying solvent, the families supported by paychecks signed by a woman who'd just publicly humiliated him. He thought about Liam, watching from across the hangar with hope burning in those 2 wise eyes. And he thought about Danny Kowalski, whose last words were static and terror. There's a way to make this flight work, Marcus said slowly, each word measured. But it requires someone in the cockpit who understands the thermal dynamics of this exact failure mode. Someone who can monitor the fuel pressure and engine temps in real time and adjust thrust accordingly. Someone with a type rating for this aircraft. Simon understood immediately. You. Me. You said you don't fly anymore. I don't. But you could. Marcus looked across the hangar at Liam. The boy had moved closer, near enough to hear the conversation, but pretending to focus on his sketchbook. Their eyes met across 50 feet of concrete and machinery. Marcus saw the question forming in his son's expression, the confusion and hope warring behind 8-year-old eyes. Are you going to help them, Dad? Even after how she treated you? Yeah, Marcus said quietly, turning back to Simon. I could. Charlotte Ashford emerged from the executive lounge, phone still pressed to her ear. She caught Simon's eye, made a cutting gesture across her throat. Wrap it up, her expression said. We're out of time. Simon walked over, voice low but urgent. Ms. Ashford, we have a complication. There's a structural issue in addition to the hydraulic problem. We can make a temporary repair that will hold for 1 flight, but it requires active monitoring from the cockpit. We need a qualified pilot with experience in this type of failure mode. Charlotte's eyes narrowed. What about the backup crew? Still on mandatory rest after the Los Angeles red-eye. And even if they were available, they don't have the specific expertise needed. This is a unique situation requiring someone who's dealt with thermal stress failures in real-time flight conditions. Understanding dawned on Charlotte's face, followed by something that might have been dismay. You're talking about Reed. Yes, ma'am. She looked across the hangar at Marcus, who was still kneeling beside the aircraft, hands covered in hydraulic fluid and grease, the physical embodiment of everything her world valued least. The janitor. Simon's correction was gentle but firm. The former test pilot. Charlotte was silent for a long moment, staring at the man she'd mocked 90 minutes ago. Then she laughed, a short, bitter sound devoid of humor. I publicly humiliated the one man who can save my company. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. She walked toward Marcus, heels clicking in the suddenly quiet hangar. Liam stepped protectively closer to his father, small fists clenched at his sides. Charlotte stopped 3 feet away. "Mr. Reed." Marcus stood, wiping his hands on a rag, meeting her eyes with the same calm he'd shown earlier. "Ms. Ashford, I understand you're the only person qualified to fly my aircraft under these conditions." "That appears to be the case." "What would it take to convince you to do it?" Marcus looked at Liam, then at Charlotte, then back at the aircraft with its hidden crack and temporary fix. He thought about the promise he'd made to himself 6 years ago, written in blood and grief and survivor's guilt. Never again. Never put himself in a position to make the kind of decision that could kill someone. But he also thought about the different kind of decision facing him now. Not whether to push limits, but whether to help, despite having every reason to walk away. Not about ego or adrenaline, but about competence and consequence. "Let me think about it," he said. Charlotte's jaw tightened, control slipping. "I don't have time for—" Marcus interrupted, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that had nothing to do with job titles. "You have until 6 p.m. That gives you 8 hours. I need to finish this repair, check the structural integrity of the temporary bracket, and run a ground test of the hydraulic system. Then I need to have a conversation with my son. After that, I'll give you my answer." He turned back to the aircraft without waiting for her response, dismissing a CEO worth hundreds of millions of dollars like she was a distraction from work that actually mattered. Charlotte Ashford stood in the middle of her own hangar, surrounded by engineers and mechanics who just watched a man in a janitor's uniform dictate terms to someone who could buy and sell his entire life with a signature. For the first time in her adult life, Charlotte had absolutely no idea what to do. The silence stretched. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive, and walked back to the executive lounge. Her heels clicked a different rhythm now, less certain, the sound of someone whose assumptions about the world had just been violently readjusted. Marcus knelt back down beside the aircraft, but his hands were steady now. The decision wasn't whether to fly. That part was already written. The decision was whether he could look his son in the eye and explain why sometimes you help people who don't deserve it, and why that doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong. He had 8 hours to figure out how to say that in a way an 8-year-old could understand. And then, he had to get in the cockpit of a machine that could kill everyone aboard if he made even one mistake, and prove to himself that 6 years of running from his past hadn't cost him the skills that defined who he used to be. The work ahead was clear. Marcus focused on what he could control: the physics of metal and hydraulics, the mathematics of thermal stress and load tolerance. The custom bracket would need to be fabricated with precision that left no margin for error. Titanium strut, 45-degree mounting angle to distribute load evenly, reinforced with high-temperature ceramic insulation to reduce heat transfer. He walked Derek and Jennifer through the design specifications, sketching on the whiteboard in the maintenance bay, calculating load tolerances without hesitation. The engineers watched with something approaching awe as Marcus transformed from janitor to expert before their eyes, the switch flipped by necessity and muscle memory. By 2 p.m, the bracket was fabricated and installed. Marcus had checked each bolt 3 times, verified torque specs with calibrated precision, run the thermal camera over every inch of the assembly looking for stress points that would show up as heat signatures. "Clean," he announced to the waiting team. Now we test it. The ground test was the moment of truth. Marcus positioned himself in the cockpit while the ground crew monitored from safe distance, headsets on, ready to shut down at the first sign of trouble. Simon stood beside the aircraft with his tablet, watching sensor readouts in real time as Marcus brought the APU online. The auxiliary power unit whined to life. Marcus watched the hydraulic pressure gauge with the intensity of a man reading his own vital signs. Steady. No oscillation. The needle held at 68 psi, like it was bolted there. APU green, Simon confirmed over the radio. Hydraulic pressure holding steady. No variance. Marcus started the port engine. The Pratt & Whitney turbofan spooled up with a deep, healthy roar that he felt in his chest. He let it stabilize at idle, then slowly advanced the throttle. 40%, 60%, 80%. Every gauge stayed in the green. Every sensor reported normal. The temporary bracket showed no thermal stress. Fuel pressure steady, Jennifer reported from the ground. Temp within normal range. Bracket holding perfectly. Marcus held the engine at 85% thrust for 30 seconds, the maximum sustainable power he'd calculated the temporary bracket could handle safely. The aircraft strained against the wheel chocks, vibrating with barely contained energy. But the systems remained stable. No warning lights, no alarms, no fluctuations. Bringing her back to idle. The engine noise dropped to a whisper. Marcus ran through the shutdown sequence with the same methodical precision he'd shown all day, then sat back in the pilot's seat, hands gripping the yoke. He'd forgotten how it felt. The weight of the controls, the vibration of the airframe, the profound responsibility of holding lives in your hands, even if those lives belonged to people who treated you like you were invisible, right up until they needed you. A knock on the cockpit doorframe pulled him back. Charlotte Ashford stood at the entrance to the flight deck, her perfect composure cracked around the edges, hair coming loose from its bun, coffee stain on her sleeve, the armor showing its seams. May I come in? Marcus gestured to the right seat without speaking. Charlotte climbed into the co-pilot's position, her designer heels absurd against the utilitarian cockpit floor. She looked around at the instruments, the switches, the screens displaying more data than most people could process in a lifetime. I owe you an apology. The words came out stiff, unpracticed, like she hadn't said them often enough to develop fluency. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He continued running his post-flight checks, logging data into the maintenance computer with the same meticulous attention he'd shown all day. Charlotte waited, hands folded in her lap, exhibiting a patience that seemed foreign to her nature. I was out of line this morning. The admission came when Marcus's silence stretched too long. What I said to you, how I said it, was cruel and unprofessional. You have every right to tell me to go to hell. Marcus finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. I'm considering it. Charlotte winced. I don't make excuses for my behavior, but I'd like to explain the context. Not to justify it, just to help you understand where my head was. I'm listening. Charlotte took a breath, and something in her posture shifted. The CEO armor cracked further, revealing the woman underneath. This merger, it's not just a business deal. It's my father's legacy. He built Ashford Aerospace from nothing, and when he died 5 years ago, he left it to me. Not my brother, who actually wanted it. Me. The daughter who went to business school instead of learning to fly. The one who chose spreadsheets over aircraft. She stared out the cockpit window at the Denver skyline, mountains rising beyond. My brother told me I'd destroy the company within 2 years. The board agreed. They tried to force me out 3 times. Every analyst on Wall Street predicted I'd fail. And for 4 years, I've been proving them wrong. This merger with Goldman Sachs Capital Partners, it's the capstone. The deal that makes Ashford Aerospace a major player instead of a boutique firm living off daddy's reputation. Marcus studied her face, seeing past the executive polish to the fear underneath. And if you miss the meeting in New York? Goldman walks. They've already got a backup deal with Textron Aviation in Kansas. If I'm not in that boardroom tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., in person, showing them I'm committed enough to fly through the night to be there, they'll interpret it as weakness. The deal dies, and everyone who said I wasn't good enough to run this company gets to say, I told you so. Marcus absorbed this, understanding the pressure, but not the cruelty it had spawned. That still doesn't explain why you felt the need to humiliate a man doing his job. Charlotte's face flushed. The truth came harder than the context. You're right, it doesn't. The truth is, I was scared. The diagnostics weren't making sense, the engineers were arguing, and I could feel control slipping away. And when I feel out of control, I get mean. I look for someone to blame, someone to make smaller so I can feel bigger. It's a defense mechanism I learned from my father, and it's a terrible quality that I've been working on in therapy for 3 years with minimal success. She looked directly at Marcus, forcing herself to hold his gaze. When I saw you standing there with your mop, I saw an easy target, someone I could lash out at without consequence, someone who couldn't fight back. And I took that opportunity because it made me feel powerful for 30 seconds. The honesty landed differently than an apology. Marcus recognized it for what it was, not an excuse, but an acknowledgement. How do you feel now? Like an asshole. And like a fool, because I humiliated the one person who actually knew how to fix my problem. If I'd paid attention instead of performing for an audience, I might have read your maintenance report 3 hours ago and avoided this entire crisis. Marcus nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Apology noted. Not sure if it's accepted yet, but noted. Charlotte seemed to accept this as fair. Simon says you're the only person who can safely fly this aircraft given the current repairs. Is that true? Probably. Will you do it? I don't know yet. What would it take to convince you? Marcus leaned back in the pilot's seat, eyes on the instrument panel he'd once known as intimately as his own heartbeat. I need to understand something first. What happens if I say no? You miss your meeting, the deal falls apart, your company takes a hit? Then what? Do you fire me? Blacklist me from the industry? Make my life difficult? Charlotte considered the question seriously, didn't rush to reassure. A month ago, I probably would have. Today? No. You've done nothing wrong. You diagnosed the problem, you fixed it, you did your job brilliantly. If you choose not to fly, that's your right. I'll be angry, but I won't be vindictive. Why not? Because I'm trying to be a better person than my father was. The admission came quiet, almost vulnerable. He would have destroyed you for saying no, burned your reputation, ensured you never worked in aviation again. But that kind of leadership, ruling through fear and intimidation, it doesn't actually work. It just makes people loyal to your power instead of loyal to you. And the moment you lose that power, they vanish. Marcus studied her face, looking for dishonesty. He didn't find any. The woman sitting in his co-pilot seat was different from the one who'd walked into the hangar 6 hours ago. Fear and necessity had stripped away the performance, left something more real. Okay, here's my position. Marcus sat forward, hands clasped between his knees. I'll fly your aircraft to New York under 3 conditions. Name them. 1. This is a single flight contract. When we land at Teterboro, I'm done. I walk away, and you don't contact me again unless it's to offer me a permanent position that I'm free to refuse without consequence. Charlotte didn't hesitate. Agreed. 2. I need a full briefing on the flight plan, weather conditions, and any potential complications. I also need final authority to abort the flight at any point if I determine it's unsafe. You're the client, but I'm the pilot in command. What I say in the cockpit is final. This time, Charlotte paused, the control freak in her wrestling with relinquishing authority. But she nodded. Agreed. What's the 3rd condition? Marcus looked out the windscreen toward the hangar where Liam was visible through the open door, still sitting on his stool with his sketchbook. I need to explain this to my son, and I need you to be there when I do it. Charlotte blinked, thrown completely off balance. Me? Why? Because he watched you humiliate me this morning. He watched his father stand there and take it, and he didn't understand why I didn't defend myself. Now I'm about to do a favor for the woman who mocked me, and he needs to understand why. He needs to hear you acknowledge what you did, and he needs to see that sometimes you help people even when they don't deserve it, because that's the kind of man I want him to grow up to be. Charlotte's eyes glistened. She blinked rapidly, clearing her throat. You're asking me to apologize to an 8-year-old. I'm asking you to be honest with an 8-year-old. Big difference. And if I refuse? Then I don't fly, and you miss your meeting. Charlotte laughed, a genuine startled sound. You're using your son as leverage? Marcus shook his head. I'm using this as a teaching moment. Liam needs to understand that dignity matters more than money, and that you don't compromise your values just because someone's rich or powerful. But he also needs to understand that kindness isn't weakness, that you can hold someone accountable and still help them. That's a complicated lesson for an 8-year-old, and I need your cooperation to teach it. Charlotte was silent for a long moment, processing this request that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with character. Then she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. Okay, let's go talk to your son. They walked across the hangar together, an unlikely pair, the janitor in stained overalls and the CEO in her rumpled Armani suit. The contrast drew stares from the remaining crew, but neither Marcus nor Charlotte acknowledged the attention. Liam watched them approach, expression guarded, protective. He'd seen enough today to know that adults were unpredictable and that his father needed defending even if Marcus wouldn't defend himself. Marcus knelt beside his son's stool, bringing himself to eye level. Hey, buddy. We need to talk. Liam's response came immediate, cutting through preliminaries. Are you going to fly the plane? Maybe. But first, Ms. Ashford has something she wants to say to you. Charlotte knelt as well, making herself physically equal with a child, abandoning the height advantage that power usually claimed. Liam stared at her with the unflinching directness of someone too young to have learned polite deception. Liam, this morning I said some very cruel things to your father. I made fun of him in front of a lot of people, and I did it on purpose because I was angry and scared. What I did was wrong. It was mean and it was unfair, and I'm very sorry. Liam didn't respond immediately. He looked at his father, silently asking permission to speak his mind. Marcus nodded. My dad's not just a janitor. The words came out trembling but clear. He's a pilot. A really good pilot. He flew in the Navy and he tested planes that nobody else could fly. And he's super smart. He knows more about planes than anybody here. Charlotte's voice stayed steady, accepting the rebuke. You're absolutely right. I should have known that. If I'd bothered to read his employee file, or if I'd paid attention to his maintenance report, I would have known, but I didn't, because I made assumptions based on his job title instead of his actual abilities. That was ignorant and disrespectful. Liam's 8-year-old logic cut straight to the core. Why did you say those mean things? Charlotte paused, choosing words carefully, refusing to dilute the truth for a child's ears. Because I was afraid my business was going to fail. And when I get afraid, I sometimes get mean to other people. It's a bad habit and I'm trying to fix it, but I still make mistakes sometimes. My dad says you should apologize when you make mistakes. Your dad is right. That's why I'm apologizing now. Liam processed this, turning it over in his mind the way he'd examine an aircraft component, looking for flaws. Are you going to be mean to him again? I'm going to try very hard not to be, but I can't promise I'll be perfect. Sometimes grown-ups mess up, even when they're trying their best. If you're mean to him again, I'll be really mad at you. Charlotte smiled slightly, the first genuine expression Marcus had seen from her. That's fair. Liam turned to his father, the bigger question forming. Are you going to help her even though she was mean? Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This was the teaching he'd wanted, the lesson that would shape how his son understood the world. I'm thinking about it. She needs to get to an important meeting, and I'm the only person who can safely fly her plane. But it means I'd have to do something I swore I'd never do again. Fly? Yeah. Because of what happened to Danny? Marcus's throat tightened. He'd told Liam about the accident in broad strokes, enough for the boy to understand why his father had changed careers, but not enough to give him nightmares. Yeah, buddy. Because of Danny. Liam's next question hit harder than any executive's demand. Do you think Danny would want you to help? The question landed like a physical blow. Marcus thought about Danny Kowalski. Loud, generous, reckless Danny, who'd once stayed up all night helping Marcus study for engineering finals, who'd been best man at Marcus's wedding, who'd sent a stuffed teddy bear when Liam was born with a card that read, Future Wingman. Danny, who died because Marcus pushed too hard, chased glory instead of safety, ignored warnings in pursuit of finding the edge. I don't know. Marcus forced himself to be honest. Maybe. Danny believed in helping people, even when it was hard. Liam nodded, decision crystallizing with the certainty only children possessed. Then I think you should do it. But you have to promise you'll be safe. I promise, Liam. This isn't a test flight. It's a normal flight with a small repair that needs monitoring. I'll be safe. Okay. Liam looked at Charlotte, channeling every protective instinct his 8 years had developed. You have to promise, too. Charlotte looked confused. Promise what? Promise you'll be nice to my dad for the whole trip. I promise, Liam, I will be respectful and professional for the entire flight. Liam seemed satisfied with this compact. He turned back to his sketchbook, effectively dismissing both adults. The matter settled in his mind. Marcus stood and Charlotte followed. They walked a few steps away, out of Liam's earshot. That's a remarkable kid. He's the reason I get up in the morning. Charlotte nodded, understanding passing between them without further words needed. Then she glanced at her watch, the CEO reasserting herself. So, are you flying? Marcus looked at the aircraft, then at Liam, then back at Charlotte. Yeah, I'm flying. But we do this my way, on my terms, with my safety protocols. Clear? Crystal. At 4 p.m., Marcus assembled the team in the flight planning office. Simon, Derek, Jennifer, and Charlotte sat around the conference table while Marcus pulled up weather charts and flight paths on the large monitor. Okay, here's the situation. His voice slipped into the authoritative tone of a military briefing, command presence that had nothing to do with job titles. We have a 4-hour direct flight from Denver to Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, the private aviation facility serving Manhattan. Weather looks good. Some light turbulence over the Midwest, but nothing severe. The aircraft is airworthy with the repairs we've made, but we're operating under specific limitations. He clicked to the next slide, showing the fuel line bracket and its thermal stress tolerances. The temporary bracket I installed will hold, but only if we keep engine thrust at or below 85%. That means slightly longer flight time and a more conservative approach to altitude and speed. We'll cruise at 41,000 feet instead of the normal 45,000, and our airspeed will be Mach 0.8 instead of 0.85. Charlotte leaned forward. Will that get me to New York in time for the meeting? Yes. We take off at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, land at Teterboro approximately 12:15 a.m. Eastern. That gives you 7.5 hours to sleep at your Manhattan hotel before your 8 a.m. meeting with Goldman Sachs. Your helicopter from Teterboro to the West 30th Street heliport takes 15 minutes. Relief washed across Charlotte's face. And if we encounter problems during the flight? Marcus pointed to the map, routes marked in red. I plotted 3 diversion airports along the route. Kansas City International for early emergencies, St. Louis Lambert for mid-route issues, and Pittsburgh International if we have problems approaching destination. All have maintenance facilities that can handle the G650. Simon leaned forward, voice serious. And if the bracket fails in flight? It won't, Marcus spoke with absolute confidence. I've calculated the load tolerances down to the pound. As long as we stay within operating parameters, the bracket will hold. But if, hypothetically, we experienced a failure, we'd have approximately 5 minutes to reduce thrust and make an emergency landing at the nearest suitable airport from my list. Jennifer looked impressed. You did all this planning in 2 hours? Flight planning is like riding a bike. You don't forget. Charlotte watched Marcus present with growing respect. This wasn't the quiet janitor she'd mocked that morning. This was a commander, confident, knowledgeable, utterly in control. He fielded technical questions from the engineers without hesitation, adjusted the flight plan based on their input, and somehow made a complex, high-risk operation sound routine. One more thing. Marcus pulled up a legal document on the screen. I need everyone here to sign a liability waiver acknowledging that this flight is being conducted under non-standard conditions due to the temporary repair. Charlotte, this protects you and Ashford Aerospace if something goes wrong. It also protects me from legal action. What are the actual risks? Marcus met her eyes. No hedging, no softening. If I do my job correctly, minimal. Less than 1% chance of a critical failure. But aviation is about managing the unexpected. I'm confident in the repair and in my ability to monitor it, but I can't eliminate risk entirely. You need to decide if the merger is worth that 1%. Charlotte didn't hesitate. It is. Where do I sign? While the legal documents were processed, Marcus retreated to the crew locker room. He'd brought his old flight suit from home, a Navy-issue Nomex jumpsuit that still fit, though tighter around the shoulders than it used to be. He changed slowly, running his hands over the fabric, feeling the weight of memory settle onto his shoulders like an old coat he'd forgotten he owned. His ATP license was in the pocket, along with his type rating card for the Gulfstream. He'd kept them current, renewing them every year, even though he had no intention of using them. Just in case, he told himself. Just in case of what he'd never defined. Now he knew. A knock on the locker room door. Simon entered carrying his tablet, expression troubled. "I've been reviewing your service record. You didn't just fly test missions. You were one of the Navy's top-rated pilots. 3 commendations for excellence, 2 safety awards, and you logged more flight hours in experimental aircraft than any active pilot in the service during your tenure." Marcus sat on the bench, flight suit half-zipped. Had. Past tense. Why'd you really quit? The question deserved an honest answer. Marcus had spent 6 years avoiding it, deflecting with half-truths and convenient omissions. But something about the day, the exposure, the vulnerability, the stripping away of pretense, made the truth feel necessary. You read about the accident? Mechanical failure. Board of Inquiry cleared you of fault. Technically, yes. The ejection system failed. That wasn't my fault. But the reason we were in that situation? That was on me. I was testing a new thrust vectoring system, and I pushed it past the recommended parameters. Danny warned me we were going too fast, too steep. I ignored him because I wanted to see what the aircraft could do. Marcus's voice dropped, the words coming harder. The system overheated and locked up. We went into an uncontrolled spin at 15,000 feet. I called for ejection at 5,000 feet, by the book, enough altitude for both of us to get out safely. My seat fired. Danny's didn't. He rode the aircraft into the ground. Simon's response came quiet, without judgment. That's not your fault. Maybe not legally, but morally? I put us in that position. I made the choice that killed him. Simon sat beside Marcus, the engineer's precision mind working through the problem. I read the full investigation report. The ejection system had a manufacturing defect, a faulty initiator in the seat's rocket motor. It would have failed eventually, regardless of circumstances. You just happened to be flying when it did. Doesn't make Danny any less dead. No. But it means you didn't kill him. Bad luck killed him. And the fact that you've spent 6 years punishing yourself by pushing a mop instead of flying, I don't think that's what Danny would have wanted. Marcus looked up, meeting Simon's eyes. You didn't know, Danny. No? But I know pilots. And every pilot I've ever met would rather die doing what they love than live watching someone else do it. If your positions had been reversed, if you'd been the one in the broken seat, would you have wanted Danny to quit flying? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He stood, zipped his flight suit the rest of the way, and checked his reflection in the locker mirror. The man staring back looked older, harder, but the eyes were the same. Pilot's eyes. Eyes that had seen things break and learned to keep functioning anyway. No. I'd have wanted him to keep flying. To be better, to be safer. To honor what we loved by doing it right. Simon nodded. Then maybe it's time you took your own advice. Marcus picked up his flight bag and headed for the door. Let's go fly. The G650 sat on the tarmac, fueled and ready, its sleek profile gleaming under the setting sun. Marcus walked around the aircraft slowly, conducting his pre-flight inspection with methodical precision. He checked the tires, the control surfaces, the engine intakes. He ran his hand along the fuselage, feeling for irregularities that eyes might miss. Charlotte watched from a distance, already dressed in comfortable travel clothes, jeans, a cashmere sweater, practical flats. She'd transformed from corporate warrior to nervous passenger, her earlier confidence replaced by visible anxiety. have you ever been in a plane where you weren't the one in control? Charlotte's laugh came nervous. A few times. I hate it. Most CEOs do. You're used to making decisions, not trusting someone else to make them for you. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Marcus smiled. No, but it might help to know that I've flown in worse conditions with less reliable aircraft and brought everyone home safe. This is a good plane, with a minor repair and a very short flight. You'll be fine. You sound confident. I am. The math doesn't lie. Liam approached the aircraft slowly, holding Mrs. Peterson's hand. Marcus's neighbor had agreed to watch the boy overnight, drive him to school in the morning. Liam looked small and scared, his earlier bravado replaced by naked fear. Marcus knelt, pulling his son into a tight hug. Hey, buddy, I'm going to be fine. You promise? I promise. This is routine, easier than driving to the grocery store. When will you be back? Tomorrow afternoon. Mrs. Peterson will pick you up from school, and when you get home, I'll be there waiting. And I'll bring you chocolate from New York. Liam's lip trembled. I don't want chocolate. I just want you to come home. Marcus's heart cracked. He held his son tighter, breathing in the scent of his shampoo, committing the moment to memory. I will, Liam. I promise. Have I ever broken a promise to you? No. Then trust me now. I will come home. Liam pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Okay. But if you don't, I'm going to be really mad. Marcus laughed despite the tightness in his chest. Deal. He watched Mrs. Peterson lead Liam back toward the parking lot, the boy turning every few steps to wave. Marcus waved back until they disappeared from view, swallowed by distance and the gathering dusk. Then he climbed into the cockpit, settling into the left seat with a sense of rightness that both comforted and terrified him. Charlotte took the right seat, buckling herself in silently. Any questions before we start? Charlotte's voice came small. Just one. What do I do if something goes wrong? Nothing. You sit there, stay quiet, and let me handle it. No questions, no suggestions, no panic. Clear? Clear. Marcus took a deep breath, his hands resting on the controls. 6 years. 6 years since he'd sat in this seat, felt this responsibility, held this power. 6 years since he'd trusted himself with lives that weren't his own. Tower, this is November Ashford requesting clearance for engine start and taxi. The controller's voice crackled back. November Ashford, cleared to start. Winds 270 at 8 knots. Marcus's hands moved across the panel with muscle memory that 6 years hadn't erased. Battery on. APU start. Hydraulic systems check. The aircraft came alive around him, systems humming, displays glowing with information he'd once been able to read as fast as his own thoughts. Starting number 1 engine. The Port Pratt & Whitney turbofan spooled up with a deep, reassuring roar. Marcus monitored every gauge, every readout, looking for anomalies. Everything green. Number 2 engine start. The starboard engine joined its twin in perfect harmony. The aircraft vibrated with barely contained power, eager to do what it was built for. Charlotte gripped her armrests, face pale. Marcus looked over at her and smiled, feeling something unlock in his chest that had been frozen for 6 years. Welcome aboard, Ms. Ashford. Let's go make your meeting in New York. He pushed the throttles forward, and the Gulfstream G650 began to roll. The taxi to runway 35 left took 4 minutes. Marcus kept the aircraft centered on the taxiway with the precision of someone who'd done this so many times the geometry was automatic. Charlotte sat rigid beside him, knuckles white, breathing carefully controlled. "This is the fun part," Marcus said, his voice calm and conversational. "When I advance the throttles, you'll feel about 12,000 pounds of thrust push you back into that seat. We'll accelerate to about 160 miles per hour in 30 seconds, then rotate. That means lift the nose, and we'll be airborne. The whole thing takes less than a minute." "What if something goes wrong during takeoff?" "If we have a problem before V1 speed, about 140 miles per hour, I abort the takeoff and bring us to a stop on the remaining runway. If we have a problem after V1, we commit to flight and deal with it in the air. But we're not going to have a problem." Marcus turned onto the runway, aligning the aircraft with the center line. He glanced at Charlotte one last time, saw the fear she was trying to hide, understood it completely. "Tower, November Ashford ready for departure." November Ashford cleared for takeoff runway 35 left. Winds 280 at 10, gusting 15. "Cleared for takeoff, November Ashford." Marcus pushed the throttles forward smoothly, feeling the engine spool up to takeoff power. The Gulfstream surged forward, pressing him back into his seat with familiar, welcome force. 80 knots. His voice stayed level, professional, while his heart rate climbed. The runway lights blurred past. The airspeed indicator climbed steadily. 100 knots. 120 knots. V1. Committed now. No going back. The point of no return. A line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. 140 knots. 150 knots. Rotate. Marcus pulled back gently on the yoke. The nose wheel lifted off the runway. For one breathless moment, the aircraft balanced between earth and sky, still rolling forward but lighter, the wings finding purchase in the air, physics and engineering combining to do what should be impossible. Then the main gear left the ground, and they were flying. Marcus felt something unlock in his chest, a tension he'd carried for 6 years released all at once. This was home. Not Denver, not the hangar, but here, in the sky, where he belonged, where he'd always belonged, despite the fear and the guilt and the years spent running. "Positive rate, gear up." The landing gear retracted with a solid thunk. The aircraft climbed smoothly, the altimeter unwinding rapidly. 500 feet. 1,000 feet. 2,000 feet. Charlotte released a breath she'd been holding. "We're really flying." Marcus confirmed what they both knew. "We are. See? Not so bad." "You're enjoying this." It wasn't a question. Marcus smiled, couldn't help himself. "Yeah, I am." He leveled off at 5,000 feet while waiting for ATC clearance to climb to cruise altitude. The sun had set behind them, painting the Rockies in shades of gold and purple. Denver spread out below, a glittering grid of lights against the gathering darkness. The Front Range stretched north and south, mountains giving way to plains, civilization clinging to the edge of wilderness. "Tower, November Ashford passing 5,000, requesting flight level 410. November Ashford, climb and maintain flight level 410. Contact Denver Center on 124.7. Marcus switched frequencies and began the climb to 41,000 feet. The aircraft rose smoothly, engines purring at 82% thrust, well within the safe operating parameters for the temporary bracket. As they climbed, Marcus divided his attention between flying the aircraft and monitoring the fuel line bracket. He'd set up a custom display on the multifunction screen showing real-time data from the temperature sensors he'd installed near the repair. Every 30 seconds, his eyes flicked to the readings, checking for anomalies. Fuel pressure, nominal. Engine temp, within range. Bracket temp, stable at 310 degrees Fahrenheit, well below the 450-degree threshold where thermal stress would become critical. Charlotte noticed his attention to the custom display. "What are you looking at?" "Making sure our repair is holding. See these numbers? That's the temperature of the bracket and the surrounding area. As long as it stays below 400 degrees, we're good. Right now, we're at 310, which is perfect." "And if it goes above 400? "I reduce thrust, which lowers the temperature, and we find a place to land." "But it's not going to happen. The math is solid." Charlotte nodded, though anxiety still etched lines around her eyes. "How long until Teterboro?" 3 hours, 45 minutes at our current speed. We'll fly over Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, then into New Jersey. Nice straight route over America." "That's a long time to stare at temperature readings." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "I've done longer. Test flights sometimes ran 12, 14 hours. This is actually pretty relaxing by comparison. And we're flying over the U.S. If we have a problem, we've got plenty of excellent airports to divert to." They reached cruise altitude 20 minutes later. Marcus leveled off, trimmed the aircraft for hands-off flight, and engaged the autopilot. The Gulfstream settled into a smooth, steady rhythm, the engines humming contentedly at 80% thrust. Marcus leaned back fractionally, allowing himself to relax by degrees. Everything was going perfectly. Too perfectly. The temperature on the bracket display ticked up slightly, 315 degrees. Not concerning, well within safe parameters, but Marcus noted it. Thermal readings often fluctuated during initial cruise as the engine stabilized. 5 minutes later, it ticked up again. 320 degrees. Marcus frowned. Still safe, but the trend was wrong. It should be stabilizing or dropping, not climbing. He checked the engine parameters. Everything normal. Thrust at 80%, exactly where it should be. 325 degrees. Marcus's voice stayed calm, but carried new urgency. "Charlotte, I need you to stay calm, but we might have a small issue developing." Charlotte's head snapped toward him, fear flashing across her face. "Define small issue." "The bracket temperature is climbing faster than predicted. It's not critical yet, we have plenty of margin, but I need to figure out why it's happening." Marcus pulled up the detailed sensor array, searching for the variable he'd missed in his calculations. Fuel pressure, normal. Engine vibration, normal. Airflow over the wing, normal. Nothing in the standard parameters explained the temperature increase. Then he saw it. One of the exhaust gas temperature sensors on the port engine was reading slightly high, not enough to trigger an alarm, but enough to indicate the engine was running hotter than optimal. The extra heat was radiating back toward the wing root, warming the area around the bracket faster than his ground-based models had projected. Marcus ran new calculations in his head, factoring in the increased heat load and projecting how it would affect the bracket over the next 3 hours. The numbers weren't catastrophic, but they weren't good either. At the current rate of temperature increase, the bracket would reach 400 degrees in approximately 2.5 hours, still 45 minutes short of Teterboro. And at 400 degrees, the thermal stress would begin degrading the integrity of his repair. "Marcus?" Charlotte's voice pulled him back. "Okay, here's the situation. The port engine is running hotter than expected, which is warming the bracket faster than I projected. We're not in danger right now, but if the trend continues, we'll reach critical temperatures before we get to New Jersey." Charlotte's business mind kicked in despite her fear. What are our options? Marcus appreciated that she asked for options rather than panicking. Option 1. I reduce thrust on the port engine from 80% to 65%. That lowers the heat output significantly, which should stabilize the bracket temperature. The downside is we lose about 15% of our total thrust, which means we have to descend to a lower altitude where the thinner air provides more lift. We'd drop from 41,000 feet to about 35,000 feet. How does that affect our fuel? We burn more fuel at lower altitude. Instead of landing at Teterboro with an hour of reserve, we'd land with about 30 minutes of reserve. Still legal and safe, but tighter margins. What's option 2? We divert to the nearest suitable airport. That would be Kansas City International in Missouri. Land, let the engine cool for an hour, then continue. That adds approximately 2.5 hours to our total flight time. Charlotte stared out the windscreen at the darkness ahead. Below them, the lights of small Kansas towns glittered like scattered stars. She was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. The merger meeting, the $250 million deal, her father's legacy, her brother's prediction of failure. What would you do if it was your decision? Marcus didn't hesitate. I'd reduce thrust and continue to Teterboro. The risk is manageable, and the math supports it. But I'm not the one with a $250 million deal on the line. You need to decide if the increased risk, and it is increased risk even if it's small, is worth it. Charlotte closed her eyes. When she opened them, something had shifted. The CEO mask had fallen away completely, leaving only the frightened woman underneath. What's the actual probability of failure if we continue? Marcus gave her the truth, unvarnished. Honestly, less than 5%. The bracket will hold unless we get a cascade failure, multiple things going wrong simultaneously. But aviation history is full of disasters that started with a 5% chance. And if we divert to Kansas City? Near zero. We land, we fix the problem properly, we continue when it's safe. Charlotte's voice came quiet, almost vulnerable. My father would tell me to take the risk. That's what he did, pushed through uncertainty, bet everything on his own confidence. He built an empire that way. Marcus waited, sensing she needed to work through this herself. And what do you think? Charlotte's laugh was bitter. I think my father's approach got him a successful company and a fatal heart attack at 62. I think he died alone in a hospital room because he'd sacrificed every relationship he had on the altar of business success. And I think I don't want to be him. She turned to Marcus, decision crystallizing in her expression. I'm not willing to risk your life or mine for a business deal. Even a $250 million business deal. Reduce the thrust. Get us to Teterboro safely. If we have to circle the airport for an hour to burn off extra fuel, so be it. And if I miss my meeting because we're late, I miss my meeting. Marcus felt a surge of respect that had nothing to do with her wealth or position. That's the right call. Is it? I just potentially killed my company to save 5% risk. Marcus's voice carried the weight of 6 years learning the difference between pride and wisdom. No, you made a decision based on the value of human life over profit. That's leadership. The kind that builds sustainable companies instead of empires built on fear. He reached for the throttle controls. Reducing port engine to 65% thrust. Initiating descent to flight level 350. The port engine's note deepened as Marcus pulled back the power. The aircraft's nose dipped slightly as he began the descent, requesting the altitude change from air traffic control. Within minutes, the bracket temperature stopped climbing and began to drop. 330 degrees, 325, 318. It's working, Charlotte breathed. Yeah, it is. The next 3 hours passed in tense but controlled silence. Marcus monitored the systems constantly, making minor adjustments to maintain optimal efficiency. Charlotte alternated between staring out the window and checking her phone, though there was no service at 35,000 feet over America's heartland. Around hour 2, Marcus noticed Charlotte watching him work, studying the way his hands moved across the controls with unconscious precision. What? I'm trying to figure you out. You're clearly brilliant, the way you diagnosed the problem, designed the repair, calculated all these parameters in your head. You could be working anywhere, making 10 times what I pay you as a janitor. Why don't you? Marcus adjusted their heading by 2 degrees, compensating for a slight crosswind. Because brilliance doesn't make you a good father. Time does. Presence does. Showing up to every school play and parent-teacher conference and baseball game does. You couldn't do that as an engineer? Not the kind of engineering I'm qualified for. Aerospace is a demanding field. Long hours, constant travel, high stress. I did that for 12 years, and my marriage fell apart because I was never home. When I got custody of Liam after the divorce, I made a choice. I could chase prestige and money, or I could be the father my son needed. I chose my son. Do you regret it? Marcus thought about Liam's face when he'd explained the fuel line bracket, the way the boy's eyes lit up during their technical discussions, the absolute trust in Liam's voice when he said, I think you should help her. Not for a second. 3 hours and 45 minutes after takeoff, the lights of the New York metropolitan area appeared on the horizon, a vast sea of illumination spreading from New Jersey across the Hudson River to Manhattan and beyond. From 35,000 feet, Marcus could see the entire tri-state area, the Manhattan skyline sharp against the night sky, the George Washington Bridge arcing across the Hudson, the lights of millions of homes across New Jersey, Connecticut, and New York. The bracket temperature had stabilized at 305 degrees. Perfect. Teterboro Tower, November Ashford, requesting clearance for approach. The controller's voice came back crisp and professional. November Ashford, cleared for ILS approach, runway 24, winds light and variable. Welcome to New Jersey. Marcus nudged Charlotte awake gently. She dozed off somewhere over Pennsylvania, exhaustion finally overwhelming anxiety. We're here. 10 minutes to landing. Charlotte blinked awake, momentarily disoriented. She looked out the window at the approaching city. From their altitude, she could see the entire Manhattan skyline, the Empire State Building, One World Trade Center, the Chrysler Building, all visible in the clear night air. The city that never sleeps, living up to its name with 1,000,000 points of light. We made it. Marcus confirmed what they both could see. We made it. She checked her watch. 12:10 a.m. Eastern. Helicopter picks me up at 7:30 from the West 30th Street heliport. I've got 7 hours to sleep at the Four Seasons. That's actually going to work. Told you the math was good. The landing at Teterboro was textbook perfect. From 3,000 feet, Marcus could see all of Manhattan spread out to his right, Times Square blazing bright, Central Park a dark rectangle in the grid of lights, the Hudson River reflecting the city's glow. The approach path took them over New Jersey suburbs, industrial areas giving way to residential neighborhoods, then the airport's runway lights appearing ahead. The wheels touched down with barely a whisper. Marcus taxied to Atlantic Aviation's FBO, the fixed base operator serving corporate aircraft, and positioned the jet precisely at the marked spot. As he shut down the engines and completed his post-flight checklist, Charlotte sat staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What? You saved my company. Marcus shook his head. I flew a plane. You're the one who saved your company by making the right call over the Midwest. They stood on the Teterboro tarmac as Charlotte's black limousine pulled up. The car would take her across the George Washington Bridge into Manhattan, about 20 minutes to her hotel. The Manhattan skyline glittered to the east, just 5 miles away across the river. The November New Jersey air was cold and clean, smelling of jet fuel mixed with salt from the Hudson. Charlotte had changed into her business suit in the aircraft lavatory, transforming back into CEO mode with practiced efficiency. But something fundamental had changed. The coldness was gone, replaced by something more human, more real. I need to say something before I go into Manhattan. Charlotte set down her briefcase, giving Marcus her full attention. I want to offer you a permanent position with Ashford Aerospace. Chief Flight Safety Officer, reporting directly to me. You'd have veto authority over any safety decision, full benefits, salary of $400,000 base plus bonuses, and most importantly, flexible hours with absolute protection for family time. If Liam has a school event, you go. No questions, no penalties. Marcus had expected this conversation, but the actual offer still caught him off guard. That's very generous. It's what you're worth. Maybe even less than you're worth. You're the most competent person I've ever watched work, and I've worked with some of the best in the industry. I appreciate that, but Charlotte held up a hand, anticipating his refusal. Before you say no, let me finish. I know you don't want a desk job. I get it. So here's what I'm actually offering. You'd be based in Denver, work from the hangar when you want, take on whatever projects interest you. Sometimes that might mean flying, sometimes maintenance review, sometimes training other pilots. It's whatever you want it to be, as long as you occasionally tell me when I'm about to do something stupid from a safety perspective. Marcus looked at the Gulf Stream, still cooling on the tarmac behind them. He thought about the past 14 hours, the fear, the exhilaration, the profound rightness of being back in the cockpit. He thought about Liam's face when Marcus had promised to come home. He thought about Danny Kowalski, who never got the chance to choose. Here's my counteroffer. Marcus met her eyes directly. I'll take the position, but not at $400,000. Pay me $150. That's comfortable for Liam and me, and it doesn't create resentment with the existing team. I'll work 20 hours a week maximum, all on site at the Denver facility. I'll review safety protocols, mentor your engineers on analog thinking, and occasionally fly when you need someone with my specific skill set. Charlotte started to object, but Marcus continued. Most importantly, I require completely flexible hours and guaranteed time off. Liam is my priority. If I need to leave for his school function, my clock stops. If my family needs me, I leave. No discussion, no penalty. Charlotte smiled, genuine warmth replacing the corporate mask. Agreed. Your terms are accepted. Your family comes first. That's now the policy. She extended her hand. Marcus shook it, feeling the shift in their dynamic. They weren't employer and employee. They were something closer to partners, bound by mutual respect instead of hierarchy. One more thing. Marcus held her gaze. Simon Graves, your chief engineer. He's good at his job, and he's trying to learn. Don't replace him because he missed the hydraulic issue. Use this as a teaching moment. Charlotte's instinct was to defend her earlier judgment, but she caught herself. You're right. I'll talk to him when I get back to Denver. Good. Marcus released her hand. Now go to your meeting before you actually are late. Charlotte picked up her briefcase and started toward the limousine. Halfway there, she turned back. The Manhattan skyline blazed with light behind her, a perfect picture of power and ambition. Marcus? Thank you. Not just for the flying, but for for being honest, for demanding that I be better. I needed that. Marcus's response was simple. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe, but it's nice to have someone accelerate the process. She smiled, genuine and warm, then climbed into the limo. Marcus watched the car disappear toward the George Washington Bridge, taillights growing smaller as it merged into the late-night traffic heading toward Manhattan. He stood alone on the Teterboro tarmac, the New York City skyline glittering to the east, New Jersey sprawling to the west. The night air was cold but refreshing, carrying the promise of something new, something better than what he'd been settling for. He pulled out his phone and dialed Mrs. Peterson's number. She answered on the second ring, voice alert despite the hour. Marcus, thank God. Liam's been asking about you every 20 minutes. Can I talk to him? Of course. Liam, your father's on the phone. A scramble of noise, then Liam's breathless voice. Dad, are you okay? Did you land? Did the plane break? Did you... Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion he hadn't let himself feel in the cockpit. Slow down, buddy. Yes, I'm fine. Yes, we landed. No, the plane didn't break. Everything went perfectly. Did you get the chocolate? Marcus laughed despite the tightness in his chest. Huck headed at the airport on my way home. I'll be back in Denver by 3 o'clock this afternoon. Mrs. Peterson will pick you up from school, and I'll meet you at home. Sound good? Sounds perfect, Dad. Yeah? I'm proud of you. The words hit harder than any executive's praise, any professional accolade. Marcus closed his eyes, breathing through the wave of feeling. I'm proud of you too, Liam. You were so brave yesterday. Braver than me. That's not true. You flew a plane. Marcus's voice carried the weight of the lesson he most wanted his son to understand. You faced the lady who was mean to me and told her she was wrong. That's a different kind of brave, and it's just as important. 3 months later, Marcus arrived at the Silverwing hangar at 7 a.m., exactly as he had for the past 3 years. But this time, instead of pushing a maintenance cart, he carried coffee and a tablet loaded with flight safety protocols. His new office was small but functional, a glass-walled space overlooking the hangar floor where he could see every aircraft, every repair, every procedure. Simon Graves had helped him set it up, the chief engineer embracing his role as Marcus's partner rather than seeing him as a threat. The maintenance staff still called him Marcus, not chief or officer. He'd insisted on it. He still wore work boots and jeans most days, getting his hands dirty when he needed to understand a repair from the inside out. Liam's corner, the space behind the maintenance cart where the boy used to sketch, was now a proper desk in Marcus's office. After school, Liam would do homework there while Marcus worked, the two of them sharing comfortable silence, punctuated by occasional questions about aircraft design or algebra. Marcus's first major initiative had been creating a cross-training program for Silverwing's engineers. Once a month, he took the entire engineering team up in a training aircraft and showed them how the systems they monitored on screens actually behaved in flight. He made them listen to the engines, feel the vibrations, understand the analog layer beneath the digital readouts. Simon had been skeptical initially, but after the third session, he'd pulled Marcus aside. I've learned more in 3 months than I did in 5 years of conferences. Derek and Jennifer had become Marcus's star students, both developing an intuition for mechanical systems that complemented their digital expertise. The quality of maintenance reports improved dramatically. Fewer false positives, faster diagnosis of real problems, better communication between engineering and flight crews. Charlotte visited the Denver facility once a month, always arriving with minimal fanfare. She'd fly commercial from LaGuardia or JFK, refusing to use the private jet unless absolutely necessary. One of many changes she'd implemented after that night over the Midwest. Today she knocked on Marcus's office door at exactly 10 a.m., carrying 2 coffees from the expensive place at Denver's Union Station. "Got a minute?" Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk. "For coffee that good? Absolutely." They sat in his office, watching the morning crew prepare a bombardier for departure. Charlotte handed him a folder, eyes bright with barely contained excitement. "What's this?" "The final merger documents. Ashford Aerospace is now officially part of the largest private aviation network in North America. Goldman Sachs Capital Partners led the consortium with us and 5 other American aviation companies. We're projecting 40% revenue growth over the next 3 years." Marcus smiled, genuinely happy for her. "Congratulations. You earned it." Charlotte's correction came gentle but firm. "We earned it. You kept me from killing myself and my company by insisting on safety over speed." That changed how I approached the entire merger negotiation. Instead of promising the moon and hoping I could deliver, I was honest about our capabilities and limitations. It made us more trustworthy, which made them more willing to partner with us. So, humility is profitable. Who knew? Charlotte laughed. Turns out treating people with respect and listening to expertise is actually good business. Revolutionary concept. A commotion at the hangar entrance made them both look up. A sleek new Gulfstream G700, the latest and most advanced model, taxied in, escorted by ground crew. Charlotte stood, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Marcus studied the aircraft with professional eyes. "What's this?" "Your new project. The G700 has a completely redesigned hydraulic system, digital analog hybrid that's supposedly revolutionary. I need someone to certify it safe before we add it to our fleet." Marcus walked to the window, examining the aircraft with the careful attention he'd give any machine that could kill you if you weren't paying attention. "This is a test flight assignment. Only if you want it. You can delegate to someone else if you prefer." Marcus thought about Danny Kowalski, who'd loved nothing more than being first to fly something new. He thought about Liam, who'd drawn this exact aircraft model 3 days ago and asked if Dad would ever fly one. He thought about the promise he'd made to himself 6 years ago. Never again. And he thought about what he'd learned over the past 3 months, that avoiding risk entirely wasn't living, it was hiding. That honoring Danny's memory meant being better, not being afraid. That being a good father meant showing Liam how to face fear with competence and care, not how to run from it. "I want it." Marcus turned from the window. Decision made. "On one condition." "Name it." "Liam gets to watch the flight from the tower. I want him to see what his old man used to do." Charlotte's smile widened. "Done." 3 weeks later, Marcus stood on the tarmac beside the G700, Liam at his side. The boy wore a visitor's badge and safety glasses, his sketchbook tucked under his arm, eyes wide with excitement, barely contained. "You're really going to fly it?" Marcus knelt, bringing himself to his son's eye level for what felt like the 1,000th time in 8 years. "I really am." "What if something goes wrong?" "Then I handle it. That's what test pilots do. But nothing's going to go wrong, buddy. I've spent 3 weeks studying every system, every component, every possible failure mode. This is the most prepared I've ever been for a flight." Simon approached, tablet in hand, professionalism barely concealing his excitement. "Pre-flight checks complete. All systems green. Weather's perfect. We're ready whenever you are." Marcus pulled Liam into a hug, breathed in the scent of his son's shampoo one more time. "I'm going to fly for about 2 hours, putting the aircraft through its paces. You're going to watch from the tower with Mrs. Peterson. When I land, I'm taking you to that burger place you love. Deal?
Deal. But Dad,
Yeah?
fly safe.
Marcus felt the words wrap around him like armor, like purpose, like everything that mattered condensed into 2 syllables. Always, buddy. Always. He climbed into the cockpit, ran through his pre-flight checklist with the calm precision of a man who'd done this 1,000 times and still treated it like the first. The engine spooled up smoothly. The tower cleared him for takeoff. As Marcus taxied toward the runway, he glanced up at the control tower. Liam was pressed against the window, waving frantically. Marcus waved back, feeling something settle into place that had been broken for 6 years. Then he pushed the throttles forward, and the G700 leaped forward, eager and powerful. The runway fell away beneath him, Denver dropping below, the Rockies rising to the west, the Great Plains spreading to the east. Marcus Reed was flying again. And he was home. Not despite the fear, but because of it. Not running from the past, but honoring it by being better. Not choosing between his son and his calling, but finding a way to give Liam both. A father who showed up, and a father who showed what it meant to face your demons with competence and grace. The G700 climbed smoothly through 10,000 feet. Marcus ran through his test protocol, methodical and thorough, pushing the aircraft through its designed performance envelope while staying well within safety margins. Every system responded exactly as the engineers had promised. The hybrid hydraulic system was revolutionary, seamlessly blending digital precision with analog reliability. Below him, Denver spread out in perfect miniature. He could see the Silverwing hangar, a small rectangle among the airport complex. Could imagine Liam in the tower, watching his father's aircraft carve arcs across the Colorado sky. Marcus keyed the radio. Denver Center, November 700. Request clearance for high-speed pass. Flight level 200. November 700. Cleared as requested. Advise when complete. Marcus dropped to 20,000 feet, aligned the aircraft with the runway, and advanced the throttles to 90%. The G700 accelerated smoothly, speed building rapidly. 300 knots, 400 knots, 450 knots. He pulled up sharply at the runway threshold, the aircraft climbing vertically in a display of power and control that would be analyzed frame by frame in the test reports. At the apex of the climb, he rolled the aircraft inverted, held it for 3 seconds, long enough for Liam to see the impossible made routine, then rolled back to wings level and began his approach for landing. The landing was perfect, smooth, controlled, exactly on the numbers. Marcus taxied back to the hangar, shut down the systems, and sat for a moment in the quiet cockpit. 6 years ago, he'd thought his flying days were over, thought the guilt and fear would never let him trust himself again, thought the only way to honor Danny's memory was to never put himself in a position to make the same mistakes. But he'd been wrong. The way to honor Danny was to fly better, to fly safer, to teach others the difference between confidence and arrogance, between pushing limits and respecting them. The way to honor Danny was to live fully instead of half alive, to show his son that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Marcus climbed out of the cockpit to find Liam running across the tarmac, Mrs. Peterson trailing behind with a smile. The boy crashed into his father with the full force of 8-year-old enthusiasm, nearly knocking Marcus off balance.
That was amazing!
You went upside down. Did you see me watching? Mrs. Peterson said that was a victory roll. Can you teach me to do that someday? Marcus laughed, hoisting his son up despite the kid getting heavier every month. Someday, buddy, when you're older. First, you have to learn the basics, the boring stuff. Safety protocols, system redundancies, emergency procedures. The flashy stuff only works if you've mastered the fundamentals. Charlotte approached, Simon and the entire engineering team following. They looked at Marcus with expressions he'd never seen in the 3 years he'd pushed a mop past their desks. Respect, admiration, recognition. Simon spoke for the group. That was textbook perfect, Marcus. Every maneuver, every system check, flawless execution. The data's going to show this bird is everything the manufacturer promised. Marcus set Liam down, ruffled his hair. It's a good aircraft, but it's only as good as the pilot flying it and the team supporting it.
Simon, your pre-flight prep was exceptional. Derek, those sensor calibrations you questioned yesterday, you were right to flag them. Jennifer, the telemetry package you set up gave me real-time data I could actually use. He looked at each of them in turn, making sure they understood. This wasn't a solo performance. This was a team success. Don't forget that when you write your reports. The engineers nodded, but Marcus could see the shift in how they stood, how they looked at him. He wasn't the janitor anymore, wasn't the invisible man pushing a mop. He was Marcus Reed, test pilot, engineer, mentor. The man who'd taken a dead-end job to be present for his son, then found a way to bring his expertise back without sacrificing the priorities that mattered most. Charlotte waited until the engineers dispersed before approaching.
You know what you just did, right? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Fluid test flight? You showed them that excellence doesn't require choosing between professional competence and personal integrity. That you can be world-class at what you do while still putting family first. That the best leaders are the ones who make everyone around them better. Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise, deflected with characteristic humility. I just flew a plane, Charlotte. You're reading too much into it. But Charlotte shook her head, eyes bright with something that looked like hope. No, I'm reading exactly enough into it. You're changing the culture here, Marcus. One flight at a time, one conversation at a time. The way you teach instead of lecture. The way you acknowledge others' contributions. The way you refuse to compromise on safety even when it's inconvenient. It matters. People are watching. They're learning. She gestured back toward the hangar where the engineers were already analyzing the flight data, their voices animated with excitement. 3 months ago, this place ran on fear and ego. Now it runs on competence and collaboration. That's not an accident. That's leadership. Marcus looked at the hangar, at the aircraft, at his son standing beside him holding his hand. He thought about the journey from that morning when Charlotte had humiliated him to this moment where she was crediting him with transforming her company's culture. The truth was simpler than she was making it. He'd just been himself, the same person he'd been when pushing a mop, the same person he'd been in the Navy, the same person he was with Liam every afternoon after school. Competent, careful, committed to doing things right, even when shortcuts were available. The difference wasn't him. The difference was that people were finally paying attention. I appreciate the kind words, Marcus said, meeting Charlotte's eyes. But I'm not trying to change your culture. I'm just trying to do good work and get home to my kid in time for dinner. If that happens to influence how other people approach their jobs, great. But it's not a strategy. It's just how I am. Charlotte smiled, understanding passing between them that needed no further words. Well, keep being how you are. It's working. She checked her watch, the CEO reasserting herself. I've got a conference call in 20 minutes, but before I go, we're hosting a safety symposium next month. Aviation professionals from across the country. I want you to be the keynote speaker. Marcus started to shake his head, but Charlotte pressed on. Hear me out. It's not about you performing or being on display. It's about sharing what you know. The analog thinking, the system awareness, the philosophy of putting safety first, even when it costs money. These are lessons the industry needs to hear from someone who's lived them, not some consultant who learned them from a textbook. The idea of standing in front of hundreds of people made Marcus's stomach tighten. He'd spent 3 years cultivating invisibility, and old habits died hard. But he thought about Simon learning to listen to machines instead of just screens, thought about Derek and Jennifer developing intuition that complemented their digital expertise, thought about all the pilots and engineers out there who might benefit from understanding the principles that had kept him alive through thousands of hours in experimental aircraft. I'll think about it. Charlotte recognized this as the closest she'd get to yes. Good enough. I'll send you the details. She walked back toward the hangar, heels clicking on tarmac, phone already pressed to her ear for her next call. Marcus watched her go, marveling at the transformation. The woman who'd mocked him 6 months ago now trusted him enough to put him on stage, representing her company's values. People could change. He'd changed, from running from his past to integrating it into a future that honored both his son and his calling. Charlotte had changed, from ruling through fear to leading through respect. Even Simon had changed, from rigid procedure follower to someone who valued intuition alongside data. Change was possible. It just required honesty, humility, and the courage to admit when you'd been wrong. Marcus felt Liam tug on his flight suit. Dad, can we go get burgers now? You promised. I did promise. Let's go, buddy. They walked toward the parking lot together, Marcus's hand resting on his son's shoulder. Behind them, the G700 sat cooling on the tarmac, data recorders already being pulled by technicians, the test flight that would be analyzed in reports and presentations for months to come. But for Marcus, the most important data point was simpler. He'd made a promise to his son and kept it. He'd faced his fear and proven to himself that 6 years away from the cockpit hadn't cost him the skills that defined who he was. He'd shown Liam that you could fall down and get back up, could make mistakes and learn from them, could be afraid and act anyway. The burger place Liam loved was a dive on Colfax Avenue, the kind of spot where locals went and tourists never found. They sat in a worn booth with duct tape holding the vinyl together, and Marcus watched his son devour a cheeseburger the size of his head with single-minded focus. Dad? Liam spoke around a mouthful of food, remembered his manners, swallowed. Are you going to keep flying? Like, as your real job now? Marcus considered how to answer. Sometimes. When there's a new aircraft that needs testing, or a safety issue that requires someone with my specific experience. But most of the time, I'll be doing what I've been doing, working with the engineers, reviewing procedures, teaching. The flying is important, but it's not the whole job. But you like flying? I love flying, but I love being your dad more. And the good news is, I found a way to do both. I get to fly when it matters, and I get to be home with you when you need me. That's called balance, buddy. It's one of the most important things you can learn. Liam absorbed this, processing it through his 8-year-old understanding of the world. So you can be good at your job and still be a good dad? Marcus reached across the table, tapped his son's hand. You can. In fact, being a good dad makes me better at my job, because it keeps me focused on what really matters. I don't take stupid risks anymore, because I know you're waiting for me to come home. I don't let my ego make decisions, because I've learned that proving myself isn't as important as being present for you. Liam smiled, understanding in a way that kids sometimes could when adults overthought things. I'm glad you're flying again. You seem happier. Marcus felt the truth of it settle into his bones.
He was happier. Not because he was flying, though that was part of it, but because he'd stopped running from who he was. Stopped punishing himself for Danny's death by denying himself the thing he loved. Stopped believing that competence and presence were mutually exclusive. The machines didn't care about his guilt. The aircraft didn't judge him for surviving when Danny hadn't. The hydraulic systems and fuel lines and turbofan engines just responded to physics and expertise, indifferent to the human drama that made them meaningful. And maybe that was the lesson. Maybe the point wasn't to be perfect or fearless or immune to failure. Maybe the point was to understand the systems, mechanical and human, well enough to navigate them with competence and grace, to respect the risk without being paralyzed by it, to honor the past without being imprisoned by it. Yeah, buddy. Marcus smiled at his son across the scarred table in the burger joint that would never make any best-of lists, but served the kind of honest food that reminded you what actually mattered. I am happier. They finished their burgers in comfortable silence, then drove home to the small apartment Marcus had kept meticulously clean for 3 years. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen barely big enough for one person, a living room with furniture from thrift stores, but it was theirs. Liam settled into his homework at the kitchen table while Marcus started dinner. Spaghetti with meat sauce, nothing fancy, the kind of meal that filled you up without trying to impress. They ate together, talked about Liam's day at school, discussed the math problem that was giving him trouble. Normal. Routine. Exactly what Marcus had sacrificed everything to preserve. That night, after Liam was asleep, Marcus stood in his bedroom looking at the shadow box on the wall. Inside were his Navy wings, his commendations, a photo of him and Danny Kowalski standing in front of an F/A-18, both of them young and invincible and convinced they'd live forever. He touched the glass over Danny's face, whispered words he'd said 1,000 times in 6 years. I'm sorry I pushed too hard. I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry you're gone. But tonight, for the first time, he added something new. I'm flying again. Being careful this time. Being better. Teaching others what we learned together. I hope you'd be proud. The photo didn't answer, but Marcus felt something shift anyway. Not absolution. He'd never fully forgive himself for the choices that led to that day. But maybe acceptance. Maybe understanding that the best way to honor Danny wasn't to stop flying, but to fly smarter, safer, with the wisdom that came from loss instead of the arrogance that came from never having failed. Marcus turned off the light and climbed into bed. Tomorrow he'd be back at the hangar by 7 a.m. He'd review the test flight data, work with Simon on the new safety protocols, maybe take Jennifer up for some hands-on training in reading analog signals. Normal work for someone who'd found a way to be exceptional without sacrificing what mattered most. And 3 months from now, he'd stand on a stage in front of hundreds of aviation professionals and tell them the truth. That competence without humility was just arrogance waiting to fail. That the best safety protocols came from understanding that machines and humans both had limits that needed respecting. That true expertise wasn't about never making mistakes, but about learning from them and doing better next time. He'd tell them about a $250 million deal almost lost because a CEO assumed the janitor couldn't possibly know more than the engineers with fancy degrees. He'd tell them about a temporary repair that worked because someone took the time to understand the physics instead of just trusting the computer. He'd tell them about a choice between profit and safety and a leader brave enough to choose correctly. But mostly, he'd tell them about a man who thought he had to choose between being a father and being a pilot, and learned that sometimes the hardest challenges had solutions if you were willing to think creatively and refuse to compromise on the things that mattered.
Marcus Reed had been invisible for 3 years. Now he was seen. Not because he'd changed, but because circumstances had forced others to look past their assumptions and recognize competence regardless of where they found it. And that, more than any technical achievement or professional accolade, was the real victory. Not the successful test flight, not the repaired aircraft, not even the saved merger deal. The real victory was being exactly who he'd always been: competent, careful, committed, and finally, being recognized for it. The real victory was showing his son that dignity and skill mattered more than titles or wealth. The real victory was finding a way forward that honored both the past and the future, both Danny's memory and Liam's needs, both his expertise and his priorities. The machines didn't care about his job title. They responded to knowledge and skill and respect for their limits. And maybe that was how human systems should work too, valuing competence over credentials, expertise over assumptions, results over reputation. Marcus fell asleep thinking about hydraulic systems and his son's laughter, and the way Charlotte's face had looked when she'd chosen safety over profit. Thinking about how far he'd come from that morning when she'd mocked him, how much she'd changed, how much they'd both learned. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new aircraft to test, new engineers to train. But tonight, Marcus Reed, former test pilot, current safety officer, always father, slept the sleep of someone who'd finally found balance between all the things that made him whole.